Welcome to the Connected Campus podcast, where we explore the ways that diverse professionals are working every day to optimize their efforts to recruit, retain, and graduate their students.
Hey everybody, Dustin Ramsell here, jumping in really quick before this rebroadcast episode to provide some context. So this is an episode that was recorded a while ago, but it's a great conversation that really relates to what this whole podcast is going to be about. And we're just kind of building out our library of content in the feed here. But some of you may know that there was a series of conversations that was under the Connected Campus banner done by some of my predecessors. So we're kind of farming from that to push those conversations out here, but just making sure that they're clear to everyone listening that they are from the past. So I do hope that you enjoy listening to this episode regardless, and we will be back next week with a brand new, fresh episode with my conversation with David Glezerman. So enjoy this conversation, and then I'll see you next week in our next episode of the Connected Campus podcast.
I'm excited to be here with you today, and we have a fantastic guest. My name is Dr. Jeff Borden. I'm going to be introducing and interviewing Lou Delzompo, who is the Chief Information Officer for the community college system in California. But I'll let him tell you a little bit more about himself here in just a second. And so with that, I'd like to welcome you, Lou. Thanks for being here with us today.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, it's a pleasure being with you.
So for the listening audience, a Chief Information Officer, I know that means very different things at different schools. Tell me a little bit about your history. What kind of CIO do you kind of consider yourself to be? What's your philosophy? How do you work in the higher ed space?
Go primarily by CTO as a way of kind of differentiating myself in a little bit from what people think of as CIOs. I don't run an MIS department. I'm not a service bureau kind of CTO. We do, in my area, we do actual software development and then run cloud operations for the community college system. Our applications are used by students, faculty, and staff across all of the now 116 community colleges in California. And we touch around 4 million individuals every term. So, pretty good size place. So my philosophy is one of a business partner. I look to achieve business objectives through technology, not the guy that you call to fix the printer, right? But I'm also not someone who's off playing with the latest iOS downloads just for fun, right? So I've always been that way. I've been a peer to my colleagues on the business side. And so who are my colleagues? Well, we are a unit of the community college system chancellor's office. So my colleagues and peers tend to be vice chancellors, either vice chancellors of academic affairs, vice chancellors of IT in some cases. But we primarily funded by state tax revenue to build these system-wide kinds of solutions.
Oh, that's fantastic. As someone who has sat more under the academic affairs banner throughout my career, but has dabbled over in technology, I love having overlap like that with people such as yourself. In terms of just your IT background, your higher ed background, your community college background, how long have you been doing this?
This is my first stop in my career where I've actually been a part of a higher ed organization, if you will. And I've been at this job for about 6 years now. Had a chance to do quite a few things in 6 years, which is always fun. Prior to that, I was primarily working for either computer hardware manufacturers or computer software manufacturers. And in the last 20 years, it's primarily been offering solutions to education, both K-12 and higher ed. Higher ed exclusively for probably the last 10 or 15 years. I've been lucky in my career. I've worked for companies kind of known for innovation like Apple Computer and Sun Microsystems, but I've also been able to work for companies who are building purpose-built solutions for education, like Parchment, who's an electronic transcript solutions vendor. So that's primarily my background. I have both a computer science degree and an MBA, so there's another part of my, looking to be a partner to the business side, if you will. I often like to add in that I have a couple of daughters who are teachers, and I have one daughter who works for the governor's office in the state of California, doing grants to higher education. So our family's kind of in the business too, if you will. So.
Yeah, higher education's the planet, and you guys are orbiting that planet.
That's right.
All together. That's right. That's great.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how similar our trajectories are. It seems like we're almost mirror images. Again, I kind of grew up in the professor realm, but I've also worked in commercial organizations who are supporting education. In fact, I usually say I've stepped back and forth between those two things as my formal position. I know you and I overlapped at Pearson for a small time.
Yep.
I'm curious, how does the work that you did for organizations that support a formal higher ed institution, how did that influence what you do now that you are on the other side, sitting inside of the formal higher education?
It makes a make versus buy analysis a little bit easier for me, since I know primarily what vendors can do and how well they can do it. And I've also built software with engineers and myself too, but I have that sort of balance in what's the way to provide the solution to people. So it's allowed me to now dive more into the business problems than I did when I was working for vendors. I wasn't really a marketing person. I was always just kind of on the development side. So I, of course, being a CTO, I got to talk to leaders at educational institutions, but I never had a chance to do deep dives like I do in this role. So we have, for example, a group called the Chief Information Systems Officers Association, CISOA, and it's made up of all of the heads of IT across all the 116 organizations that are part of the system. And they offer a certification course on how to be a CISO in higher ed. And so when I first came to this job, I signed up for the certification course, and it was just a great way to get that deep dive into like what's important. Like if someone had said, what are the key systems for higher ed? I never would have before this said the emergency notification system. Right. I always think about teaching and learning and all these other things, but there's all these, block and tackle kinds of things like giving students parking permits, these kinds of things that are really important to keeping things moving inside a higher ed organization. And I learned that most higher ed organizations have 20 to 30 software integrations to do between their student information system and all these feeder systems. So, you mentioned being a connected campus, right? And I know we're not really talking about integrations necessarily on this call, but integrations are a major issue for higher ed institutions. And, if you look at the average tenure of people in a higher ed organization in IT, it's a lot less than it is for someone, say, in your positions on the academic side. The academics tend to stay with the organization for 20, 30 years. But in IT, they're moving in and out, they're recruited away for higher paying jobs. And so having a consistent architecture and strategy for these kinds of things is really a challenge for most IT organizations in higher ed.
That is I love that you've seen that from both sides, of the equation. My probably greatest mentor used to say to me, no one realizes the power that the person who schedules classes actually has. The ability to say, you can go to this building and use this room, and then you have to go all the way across campus and use this building and this room, or I can make your life easy and put you back to back. I mean, that scheduler has a tremendous amount of power. And so as you're discussing these small, what may seem like minor systems, the importance of connecting those, giving transparency to those, making those available for others to see and to have input on, you're right, that's crucial.
Well, I was just going to say that, in that example, I've often thought about what kinds of elements you'd have to put into a machine learning algorithm to do that well. If you try and take into consideration, a single parent student who, can't take courses after 4 o'clock because they have to go and pick up their kids, right? You have all these facets of things that you have to factor into the machine learning algorithm. It's not as fancy as like, what are you likely to buy next on Amazon, right? But it's still a real problem that unfortunately there hasn't been that many software solutions to date to address.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that for a second. So combining kind of what you've already said about connection. In fact, I know that you worked on a startup that had the word connected in the title. So connection means something to you. This is a podcast about connection. And we try to think of it quite holistically, connecting people, connecting systems, connecting people to systems, connecting people to support. What does connection mean to you?
Well, yeah, it's a great question. There's multiple layers, of course. I think at the first level, what makes a student successful is feeling connected to the organization, to the institution. And that connection can take many forms, but as we know, you and I both know, it can be very intimidating for any individual to start college. You go from this protected environment in high school where pretty much everything is done for you. You show up and study, of course, not saying you don't, but everything else is kind of like you're spoon-fed everything. But in college, it's the other way. In fact, I remember sitting on a acquisition team with a bunch of librarians. We were looking at a new system that we were going to acquire for the community colleges for a system-wide library. And there was an optional feature of the software package that allowed an instructor to add an electronic learning object to Canvas and automatically connect that with the library so that the student, when they access it, could check it out of the library, in effect, electronically. And the librarian said, I'll never forget this, we don't want to make it that easy for the student. Because part of the experience is learning where to go find stuff in the library. And my jaw just dropped down. I couldn't believe it that was the way that this individual had internalized what their job was to make it a bar for someone to get over. And I guess that has its place, but that's not the way I think, right? Connectivity and integration is, something that's supposed to make your life a little bit easier, right? So then that's that second level of connectivity. It's like, how do these systems like Canvas and the library system interact with one another so that in your course shell, you can get all the resources you need to do the class assignments and other kinds of things. In addition, there's the problem we see where you look at what are the systems that a student uses most often, and what are the systems that the institution thinks are most important. And they're on opposite sides of a wall, basically. So the student information system is supposed to be the source of truth for a student, but yet the student's interacting with Canvas, in our case, that's a system-wide solution for LMS. And if they change their contact number in Canvas, it is not updated in the student information system. Then if something happens and God forbid they have to be contacted, nobody knows the correct number. And the student goes, what do you mean? I put it in Canvas. Why don't you guys have that? And so those are other aspects of it where the lack of connection or lack of integration could be tragic in that particular case, God forbid, right? So you've got that. And then at the lowest level are the bits and bytes things, moving data around. There's thousands of reports that higher ed institutions need to produce on a regular basis. They have to say, this student took this course, therefore I should get whatever dollars per student per class that you give me for that student. Yes, they were a California resident. Here's the proof that they were a California resident. And that integration, in our case, if you look at just the reports that a college has to send to the chancellor's office on a regular basis, and how much work it is to compile all the data to send to the chancellor's office, it's a 2 FTE job to do that. 2 full-time equivalents just to move data around. It's insane. How many hundreds of thousands of dollars are wasted basically because there's a lack of integration. So those levels, I said, there's the, student has to feel connected in some way to the people and the place. They also need to have their applications connected so they can get their work done. And at the lowest level, you have to look at the systems integrations for things like saving dollars so that more dollars can be applied to instruction or other things that are important. So that's kind of how I look at connectivity.
I love the holistic nature of your view of connectedness. I think we share that as well. So that makes my heart happy. I've got to say now we're 15 minutes in, and neither of us have talked about coronavirus or COVID, which some people may think that's really great, and others may say, hey, it's the elephant in the room. How can you not talk about it? So with regard to connectivity, with regard to the community college experience that you're now dealing with, I just need to pause really quickly and ask, what has COVID done to your 100 plus institutions,
Sure.
as well as to you individually? How are you guys dealing with that?
Sure. Well, in a state as large and diverse as California, you can imagine that there are some institutions that are, prior to COVID, more remote instruction friendly or online instruction friendly than others. And in some strange ways, like Little College of the Siskiyous up in the most northern part of California has a total enrollment of 3,900. So they're basically like a really big high school in that way in terms of size. But they serve as a college the largest geographic area of any college in our state. And so you can infer from that, and you'd be right, that they have to do remote instruction or online learning. Otherwise, they can't do their job because there's not that many people that live right close to where the college is. So they're very attuned to that before COVID. Another example is Coast Community College down in Orange County. They are the #1 provider of online instruction to the military, the Navy, basically. So deployed naval personnel get a lot of classes from Coast. And so they're very up. So when COVID hit and all the colleges had to immediately go into an online learning modality, schools like those were very well prepared, and basically it was a scale up thing. But for the vast majority of the schools, it was not only a shock to the students, right, but it was a shock to everyone in the school, right, everyone in the institution. If you've never used Canvas before, but now you have to because you can't do anything but use Canvas, that's a learning curve for you. And you would know better than I do about the modality difference and how you actually teach online versus in person. But going on Zoom now and using Zoom as your communication mechanism, that was a big step up for a lot of instructors. You take it into my side of the world, on the IT side, one of the first things we were all struggling with was how do we get students in across our organizations access to the internet? It may sound weird, right? But most students, their internet access is their phone, right? And is a phone an appropriate mechanism for online learning? We could argue that for a long time, but basically getting people a Chromebook or a laptop or something along those lines where they could use it. And then the challenge of internet access. Many households can't afford internet access at home. How do we do that? People got really creative with, Wi-Fi hotspots on buses, allowing students to just drive into the parking lot at the college and they'd have hotspots out in the parking lots. Those kinds of things were interesting to do, but that lasted maybe 2-3 weeks, and everybody was kind of over the hump to wherever they were going to be in the first couple of weeks. What really became kind of an ongoing challenge and is still there is two things. One was digital infrastructure, right? So, the wet signature, right, on all these pieces of paper. You need a wet signature. Well, you can't get a wet signature anymore. What are you going to do? So, do we use Adobe EchoSign? What tools do we use? Is it legal to do that? There were some people that said legislation prevented digital signature in a lot of cases. So we had to get past those, and we're still struggling with many of those. There's been just a lot of things that have been hand waved, or waivers have been granted basically to get around a lot of those things. But for the most part, colleges are now operating. They have students online, all the rest of it. And then the second part is a little bit more difficult to quantify. We're still trying to measure it. But we saw an increase in applications to community colleges by about 2/3 year over year. Yet enrollments dropped. So the question was, what's going on? Is it that some colleges reported that they had so many people trying to get courses that they couldn't, because it was all remote, they couldn't respond fast enough, and students either said forget it or they went someplace else. The second thing that we're suspicious of is that people played a waiting game with their four-year institution, right? Is my four-year institution going to open up? Can I go on? Can I stay in the dorms? What can I do? And if it went one way, they went to the 4-year. If it went the other way, they would try and come. But in a lot of those cases, they waited too long and they just really weren't able to get in. So that's the other challenge that we're now all looking at and trying to say, well, the state has budget issues. We're not as well funded as we were. There's a cliff. Actually, tomorrow is another cliff for a budget. And if the federal government doesn't pass a quote unquote bailout bill for education in the United States, we're going to see another cut from the governor's office next month. And that's going to be harsher because we've been operating at a non-cut level for the first couple of months of the fiscal year, and then we're going to hit this drop off again. So COVID is very real. Although what I have to say is that it's a tribute to the adaptability, I think, of our system and just the pragmatic nature, I think, of community colleges, that people haven't stood back and said, oh, this is ridiculous, I can't do this. They've just rolled up their sleeves and said, okay, let's figure out what we're going to do here. Right. And that's what I love about community college system people. They don't normally, I should say, they don't normally stand on the formalities, basically.
Wow, what again, a holistic answer, which shouldn't surprise us after what you've already talked about with regard to connectedness. Yeah. Exactly. So yeah. As we go through this, you really talk there at the end about trying to get students in the door who say they're coming. Now, I understand this is a strange year. There are, stories of students who are saying, I'm going to take a gap year, and their parents are saying, no, you're not. You're going to enroll at the community college or whatever. And maybe that happened, maybe that didn't. Even under normal times, though, the enrollment issue is pretty serious for the community college system, right? I'm curious. What do you guys do with that?
Well, so it's been an issue for a long time, as you said. We generally see between 60 and 70% of our applications not converted. So sometimes that's because of double counting. A student might apply to multiple community colleges in their area and only go to one. So we haven't scrubbed the data thoroughly, but it is a big enough problem that people have spent a lot of time trying to figure out what it is. Prior to looking at that problem, the system decided that the real problem was that students wouldn't complete. So they would come in the door, but they wouldn't complete. And so they invented something called guided pathways, which are basically, here, if you follow these prescribed set of courses for the major that you're interested in or for the institution you want to transfer to, you'll be successful in 2 to 3 years. And that's the standard, 2 to 3 years for the community college courses. Unfortunately, many students are in their 6th year of trying to get out of community college. So the problem still exists, how to get successful. But people have now turned, because of COVID, to this question of why aren't we seeing more conversions? Why aren't people actually doing it? And one element of it, although probably not the only element, but one element is this heavy bar of intimidation when a student first approaches the aspect. I've filled out the application. That's easy. It's an online form, right? Click, click, click. I'm done. 15 to 20 minutes later, I'm applied. We accept everybody, so you're in, right? Now, though, what do? Many colleges, it takes them 2 to 3 days to reach back out to you. And in that 2 to 3 days, you're sitting there going, what's going on? Did I hit the right buttons? Yeah. Whatever. And so we came up with this idea of something called My Path, but the concept generalized is more about you're immediately part of a community as soon as you click the application button. In fact, before you hit the application button, you're part of the community. So we've added in things like, I know you want to apply to college, but what do you want to do? What about going to this career guidance application we have and experimenting a little bit, answering some questions about yourself and making sure that you're picking the right community college for what you want to do? And so that has been somewhat successful. We track the numbers of people who actually enroll based on the career guidance thing, and the rates are higher. If you do the career guidance, the rate of enrollment turns out to be higher. Secondarily, though, it's, well, it looks like you're eligible for financial aid. Oh, I am? Yes. Have you filled out a FAFSA? No, I haven't. Well, here's the FAFSA form. Let us help you fill it out. So in the past, you would hit the application, and you'd show up in the office in the college, and you'd talk to somebody, and they'd say, you're eligible for financial aid, or all the rest of it. With COVID, no person to go talk to, can't pick up the phone. How do you interact? So the systems need to step up and create now that sense of I'm part of something. There's a system that's supporting me, a series of supports. Financial aid is a big one, right? I'm on a program where I get my meals from the state. Okay, well, you get this little card. If you're ever on campus, you get free food. Can't go on campus right now. How do you get your free food that you used to get from being in the community college? So these kinds of things are natural questions to be asked. And I think the systems now need to provide those supports. Even just a chat bot. There's a lot of technology around that. Amazon has theirs, Google has theirs, Apple has theirs. But how do you translate just the ability to ask a question of a machine with something that actually is pertinent to what you're trying to do? You need to have people at the colleges who now can anticipate the kinds of answers to the kinds of questions that the chatbot is going to get. So it's fascinating to me that that these issues have for so long just been the purview of the counselor or the registrar, and that they've just been able to deal with it because they've done this forever and they know every question that anybody's ever going to ask them. But now COVID has shined a light on this stuff about, well, we might be able to do this a little bit better with software to support what's going on. So yeah.
Lou, I don't try to do this very often. I'm going to be what may seem a little gratuitous. I implemented the software at St. Leo, where I was the chief innovation officer, because I believe in it. And so when I came here, part of what I was hoping to see, and my question really will stem from this, was that it would change the way that people connect outside of that face-to-face experience, or supplement, augment, help that face-to-face experience. I'm curious, with what you're describing, do you see the result of what we're doing during this COVID context translating to a better experience, a bigger capture or a bigger net, if you will, so that when COVID's over, we'll still have people going back to the face-to-face, get your questions answered experience. But now we'll also have potentially the ability for that to take place through these platforms like campus, through these connection vehicles, so that less students will fall through the gap. Do you perhaps see that as an output here?
The longer it goes where we don't see on-campus instruction, the more likely it is to be true, I think. Because I think, in the sort of the end of the spring term where everybody started shutting down in March last year, right? And they were like, oh, we just got to get through this and we'll just cancel summer session and we'll ride it out and there'll be something in the fall. And then there wasn't. And then it got to be, we need to let everybody know whether we're doing on-campus instruction or not. We were out of time. And then they were focused on making that decision, right? So they made that decision. They started the term in earnest. In general, they had the same enrollment as they did before, with some exceptions. And now it's settling in that they don't have a choice anymore, right? They have to realize that this is going to be the normal for the spring term now again. And who knows if there will be enough vaccine out there or whatever. No one can predict it. So now leaders are starting to rise to the challenge, and they're looking at it and saying, we really need to invest in some of these things. And my peers across the system have told me that things that they've tried to implement for 4, 5, 10 years even, all of a sudden they're just getting approval to do it because of COVID. So, it's terrible, right? God knows we've all been impacted by, I would say I'm inconvenienced for the most part. I haven't been affected, thank God. But there are others I know who have been affected in serious ways with the problem. And so, it's terrible in that sense. But from an IT perspective, it's created a very real business case for digital innovation now. And I think the solutions are going to be more of the norm than the exception. But I think that there are systems out there where you can look and say, like, in support organizations for software, right? You see kind of like a common set of questions that are occurring all the time. They're starting to convert those common set of questions into answers for the chat bots, right? And other kinds of things. The IT organizations in higher ed are nowhere near that right now, right? They're just kind of recognizing that a chatbot might be something they want in their connected system, basically, right? And they have still 3-4 more learning years to go through before they get to where people in customer support are already at, right? Sentiment analysis based on website clicks and these kinds of things. Who does that in higher ed? It doesn't happen, but it could, right? And you could start to see systems like this and other things start to tell people, this person hasn't signed in for 3 days now, right? Or they haven't signed into Canvas for 3 days now. They haven't, asked a question in any of their course shells. All those kinds of things are early warnings of someone who's potentially going to fail. Something's going on in their life, they're not paying attention to course. So all those kinds of things, which in other industries are now common, right? Using machine learning we talked about earlier on, they're all common too. So I think there's still a ton of stuff to do in that area. But I do think that the sort of basics of helping for onboarding, the basic onboarding, we're gonna see a lot more investment in these kinds of systems to help with onboarding.
Bummed that we have to wrap this up, but I think we are a little even over time. It has been amazing talking with you. I love how you approach connectedness. I love the conversation around how you're connecting others. Let me finish with a question that, in the old days when someone would retire, they'd give them the gold watch. Nowadays, I don't know, maybe they give you an iPhone. I don't know what people get when they retire these days. But they would etch something in it quite often. And I'm curious, when you finally hang your hat and say it's time to go, whatever you do, boat, golf, whatever that might be. What do you hope is etched on the back with regard to connectedness? When they say thank you for connecting our students, our higher education experience, whatever, what do you hope that they thank you for?
I guess just thanks, would be the only thing I'd be looking for, really etched in there. Just a thank you would be fine. I've been very, very lucky in my career. I've had patents, I've had, technical papers written, I've been able to speak at major conferences and these kinds of things. So I've already kind of had the recognition really. But I guess thanks would be good enough.
Thanks for listening to The Connected Campus. Please leave a 5-star review for the show and share it so others can discover us. Make sure to also subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode of The Connected Campus.